privilege in structural inequalities.
But of course it's right what he says, but also he should really mean his entire professional life.
Yeah. I used to love him, like in the 90s, Jaron Lanier, when he would come up on something or be at an event or something, he was so cool. Because he would like throw out lots of really optimistic possibilities, like, oh, we could do this, you know. And now he's a real like doom and gloom guy. Like they've all become that, like Ray Kurzweil and Lanier and all of them. Steve Wozniak in particular, yeah. Really kind of dystopian in a way.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to sort of boil it down to a really simple nutshell, the 60s kind of enthusiastic hippie moment has delivered us into the hands of worse opportunity.
Yeah. The whole supposedly non-hierarchical Silicon Valley meritocracy is actually ultra terrifying.
Grateful Dead.
Long time ago.
There's this movie about the other one.
And then take apart and then take a picture.
I don't know exactly. There's something great that, of course, coming out of San Francisco are famously free concessions. The Bob Weir, of course, being the one who's all structure and everything.
Yeah.
Hey Mike, just trying to wrap, I mean really this is the last one, hold on, I can put you a bit nearer now. Everybody comes across as quite exhausted, but I think we'll try and wrap up in one way or another now. So we'll just put you.
A friend of mine who's in San Francisco, she sent a photo the other day.
That's Mike. Shall we try and pull some things together? Or apart, whatever you do pulling with. Looks like we have copious amounts of notes. I think we're done with the screening. I think this is really just drawing a memory back to just memory images on.
I did it.
That's right. So.
Want me to read my notes?
So there's Michael's Sorry, Mike, I'll have to move you back to where you seem to rightfully belong. You can see some.
So this is, I took the notes for Ailish's section on technologies, and her framing notion of entanglement. Actually, we sort of stuck to that quite thoroughly. I thought we sort of, as Edgar said, we sort of resisted the temptation to focus too explicitly on issues of representation, talked more in the broader context. She was deriving that notion of entanglement from Ingold's concept of creative entanglements. Not a network, but a meshwork of interwoven lines of growth and movement. It's kind of sort of becoming's idea, everything in movement, everything in sort of dynamic. When it came to the discussion, we were initially looking at Big Hero 6, there was lots of talk about the kind of humanoid, animated figure of the robot, questions of its agency, the degree to which it was a passive receiver of input from the human characters, how it acted and behaved and was kind of in the space. Edgar made a good point about the screen interface logic within the scene. The fact that though the thing could talk, And though the thing could obviously hear and relay information, it ultimately resolved in the form of a screen on the body. It had a kind of screen interface logic, and that connected through to the second clip as well, the way in which lots and lots of complex information about how the figure of Hera was working on the robot Baymax amounted to a montage of screens showing certain kinds of manipulation. That differentiation within the scenes of humans and robots, this idea that everything is animated, everything is ultimately coming out of the same computational processes, and yet we have these distinct categories of the human, the robot, and so on. That was sort of emphasised. As said here, all forms are on the same plane of existence as CGI. And then the point was made about the subjectivity of the camera being the robot's point of view, the boy's point of view, a kind of impartial information point of view, showing us the interior of the body. It seemed a kind of liberated cinematography. With regard to the second clip, we talked more about the idea of Baymax's easy manipulation, the sort of master-slave paradigm in robotics, a controller-master and a sort of slave, and that extended out into this idea of animation as a kind of slave object. In terms of talking about the contexts which the scenes seem to evoke, there was this point made about the celebration of the spirit of invention, the sort of techno-culture that the scene in the film seems to evoke. And again, Edgar made the point about the notion of the work being animated by cultural scripts, you know, part of the kind of easy to digest framing devices that the film used ultimately relies on, you know, certain kind of tropes, cinematic tropes. The idea of the kind of Sonny Chiba style martial arts film being shown on the screen and that being motion captured for Baymax to become a fighter. He's not learning karate, he's learning karate in a film. In that sense, the film doesn't have a kind of a priori reality, it's a film within a film within a film, I think was your point, Edgar. The machine is reading the data, that was kind of highlighted. The card as a kind of residual old tech. The general notion of posterity, identity. The card as a kind of spirit, soul, manifestation. Animation's general interrelation between old and new texts was something that was sort of posited there. Verena made a great point about the materiality and the sense of disgust evoked by the form of Baymax, the kind of skin, the sort of translucent skin of the robot. And that moved into a discussion of the robot as a kind of obese body, balloon-like, and then the Eisenstein's idea of the plasmaticness of the body, its kind of changeability. It can wither away like a popped balloon, it can hyperinflate, it can do all this kind of stuff. A general obsession with skin connected then to the ideas of Ed Atkins. In relation to the clips, the Aardman clips, the claymation, we talked a lot about the hybrid spaces of animation and the idea of ambiguity. The point being that the film, or rather the marketing of the film, advocates for a handmadeness, the authenticity, a kind of the aura of the handmade stop motion film, and yet nonetheless computer processes, compositing, 3D printing, all of those technologies are being deployed to serve that image. a point that was made in that discussion with regard to a glossary or vocabulary was a general need to talk more about suspension of disbelief, notions of immersion and so on. The call or pull of the image, that was kind of something that was noted at that time as needing to sort of come back to. Okay, and then with regard to the Magic Leap demos, Ailish's point was what becomes of animation if you think about it through technology. An inversion was suggested where what becomes of technology if you think about it through animation, sort of interchangeability of those terms, sort of, as being a sort of productive move. The general question of what are the desires behind such a product was emphasised in relation to Magic Leap, like what's this for, why do we need it, and so on. But based on that inversion, you know, what are the desires behind animation? What leads us to animation? The general question of the military investment in the interface was raised, like military money being so integral to a history of audiovisual technologies. Specific to these kinds of technologies, it would be interesting to know, you know, what is the kind of military stake there. The general question of the subjectivity evoked by the video was raised. We spoke about a daydreaming psychotic subject. It's kind of, who is this person that uses the Magic Leap? And then we spoke about this idea of a synthetic situation, the overlaying of work into the real world, the blurring of public and private. Parallels were drawn with Hugh Hefner's Laboratory for Living, sort of pornotopia, and the final point that was made was about, in relation to the transactional logic of the image, this idea that the image overlay really amounted to a set of demands, like do this, consider this, you know, a sort of productivity task-driven thing. And even the gameplay that was shown was competition-based, shoot this, kill this, you know, win, lose. Suggesting that what was on offer there was a kind of things to either be sent away or dealt with later or edited. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we continue with Esther's presentation and the centrality of ghosts, questions around relative precedence of the living and the dead, and historic conventions around those relative privileges. Mark Leckie's work. Mark Leckie's returning to the figure of Felix, and Felix as a figure of a ghost. He looked at the skeleton dance film, and that was discussed in terms of ideas of replication, fragmentation of the body, connection to Taylorism, interchangeability of parts, reconfiguration of the parts. Questions around when mortality entered animated cinema as a theme, and that was mentioned in relation to Disney 1937 Snow White film. And there was a discussion of replication of labour, both in animation narratives and in terms of labour relations of animation production. The ghost as the unkillable life, morphing the skeleton, possible connections between animation in the 20s and persistence of tropes and genres from vaudeville theatre, styles of performance from vaudeville theatre. And then there was a discussion of two types of drawing in animation in the 20s. The key drawing that defines kind of iconic expressive pose, and an intermediate drawing that traces the moves in between the key poses. We then looked at the Poledna film, and Pierre Huige, questions around assembly of body parts, and I'm struggling to read my handwriting. Relationship between the anchoring, the figure ground relationships in animation, question of the anchoring of the animation relative to something static. Many aspects of the conversation around Huige in terms of generating images out of different source codes. We looked at the Mark Leckey Maiden Heaven relationship to the mirroring, the sculpture as mirror, the absence, the camera, the absence, the viewer. And then the Peter Gidal Clouds film looked at in terms of a medium. Esther's interested in media of agitation, and this term that you use, turbidity. So the notion of the cloud as a screen, the cloud as a surface, the cloud as a dream space. Okay, and then moving on to this afternoon, and Mike's presentation, he talked about the use of comic strips where exactly the same frame is repeated with altered speech bubbles, and looked at what he called the iteration structure in Tom and Jerry, which I took to mean repeated actions in slightly altered guises. He emphasised the use of kind of formal tropes which are understood by the audience, like scrolling background in loops with looped background paintings. The Roadrunner and Daffy Duck, kind of fourth wall, breaking the fourth wall, the notion of an empathy with the audience, the notion of what he called a conspiratorial structure of empathy. And he compared that with Ray Harryhausen. And there was some discussion of how later digital animations try to approximate qualities and sort of effects of earlier handmade techniques. Okay, and then continuing on through the discussion of Robocop and the making of props and models in Robocop. And he talked about the discarding of compositional tropes in other genres of animation. And there was some conversation around significance of genre, and gravity as being something like a big data genre of film, where a new kind of quantitative range of animation is possible. And then there was some discussion of which I'm afraid I didn't entirely follow, of Hitchcock's Rope and Land Secret Beyond the Door by Mike. And there was discussion of the continuing influence of Kubrick, the unravelling of Kubrick's influence in Black Nolan. Okay, and this afternoon with Ramon's presentation about platforms. There's discussion of Microsoft Office as a kind of set of formal constraints that produces certain kind of text production in MS Word, as in the Nigerian scan letter. And then there was Ramon's outlining the principles of the platform in terms of these 5 main claims around what characterises a platform, setting a master plan, having what he calls generative entrenchment, being centralised and distributed, requiring user identity, and having a strategic requirement of a minimum threshold of new content without actually producing that content. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Have to do hard work.
Well, there's a lot left out of that.
Thank you. It's quite useful to have that kind of rewind, fast forward.
If you know, read your notes, take it from their notes.
Exactly. So we reduce it
Reverse
down.
Chinese mirrors, Chinese whispers.
Get down to 5 words eventually. They'll probably be the ones we started with. Yeah, so what do we want to do there? Do we want to keep working here, or maybe, to decide a few words that we take upon ourselves to work up into first entries in the glossary? Or would we rather stop now and we meet again in June with the
Magnetism. I mean, there's a couple of things that, there's confirmed. We have Tom Mitchell coming in 10th of June, and that will be both a seminar and a public lecture. So it's we can think about how we want to use that beyond talk to him about some of his initiatives and so on. Miltus Maletus is we'll try and find a date, I guess, around similar time or so. But then also, given that there's interest by other people whom we have approached, so Christopher Blumlingus and signaled interest, Mark Leckie is interested enough but to commit until October. So it seems to, exactly, which is fantastically exciting. So I think one of the questions for us is what kind of strand this should become, and how to both develop an ongoing conversation that maybe doesn't erupt into a big festival.
But also in terms of, all this stuff today, not in terms just of an archive, but coming back to this idea of the actual glossary as a way of capturing in some ways. And to me, what we seem kind of productive is not again creating another conversation right now, because it's already, I think I want to just also step back a bit and suggest maybe that some of us write. It would be really nice to see something written down, to take from the day actually, and bring that into at least a paragraph or something. That would be really interesting. What from all that big things or small things actually makes sense for your own from within your practice and working approach.
I would find it helpful to have some kind of locating of all the conversations today in relation to the readings that were proposed. Maybe especially Ansel Frank.
Yeah. 4 or 5 texts came from my side. My suggestions. I would love to think about that. And really, I thought during the sessions what texts we correspond very well, like the whale text on what is animation, where it talks about the live action film, and yeah, in
Yeah.
interesting ways. So this came in the discussion in a very interesting way, actually, and also the term of the ecology. I mean, he gave a paper. I was at the Lewis conference in Jordan in Ghent, and he gave a paper there on women, on Ko Abbas, the women of the Kings, where he talked about precisely also this question of this environmental ecology driven dimension in a way. He gave me his paper as a kind of, so I just read it for something else, and that ties in really interestingly in what we at the end, towards the end.
But the interesting to think about that in relation to the desert, which kept reoccurring.
It is absolutely also the sad,
Yeah.
the actual, and the strange. I mean, if you know the film, it's not just a novel, but the film itself is. I mean, I still have it. But if you have a chance to watch it, it's really worth, and it captures a lot what we talk as well.
Yeah.
So maybe that could also be a step forward, that we have a chance that people see it somehow, and that could be used as a
Yeah.
kind of another entry into that from a very, that's a question, from a very different position or not so much.
Yeah.
But then we are also, yeah, that could be interesting. I don't know, but
I think Teshi Gahara is very. He's one of those filmmakers where it's like, if he had been born maybe 10 years later, he probably would have been an animator. You get that feeling, that sort of desire to work with the image as a material. He's using the captured material in a conventional film form, though he has kind of surrealist thing, but you almost feel like animation is just rumbling away behind the image.
But I'm because I speak on Friday at this conference, and I talk about Gigi Spurious work, which I showed yesterday, and refer to this woman of the dunes. So for me, those two, there's also a link of the trap somehow, this time arrested movement,
Yeah.
and then talk about also horizontality, bigger ground.
Just one thing, I mean, I wasn't involved with the essays or anything and just came to contribute really, but Roger Caroua's essay on mimicry, I've always found a really great essay from the point of view talking about animation, in the sense that the animal which chooses to mimic, like become like the tree branch, gives up some of its life, becomes like undead, and often gets eaten more than the animal that isn't camouflaged. And I think Caroua's involvement with French surrealism and so on, like when we think about films like Women in the Dunes, I always think Caroua's a really good kind of like way of getting to that kind of work. And also the Hans Richter.
But then Mitchell is interesting on that question.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The whole representation.
I think in Japan, Japan as well, like you think like Junichiro Tanazaki's In Praise of Shadows, that like shadow as a kind of animated thing that comes into a scene and kind of adds a layer to it, you know, like light and dark, giving us access to form in an animated way, the way light and shadow move in the course of a day and an evening, the way light and dark move around a form and create a sensuous apprehension of form. And electric light eradicates that, you know.
And also we have light in still life.
Yeah.
Kind of there is this work by the artist, Italian video artist, who made this rotting still life. Kind of
Santana Wood.
Yeah, exactly, Santana Wood. It's not very special work, I think.
But it's interesting.
The question was interesting from this point of view, and then the femtoph
Well, I was just thinking that the femtone, you can separate light from its shadow.
Yeah.
Take these two things apart now, so what does that do to, that exactly sense in kinds of shadows? You can take this thing off and leave the light behind, and then also in terms of still life, the way it's a Coke bottle that's being illuminated, you know, you could have sent it over some beautiful fruit. It's a Coke bottle, as this is now.
I wonder if there's a connection there between, because we were just in the coffee break, Anka was saying that there's a kind of sense of Eastern European animation being distinct, or Russian animation being distinct. Think of the Tanzaki text as being, it's borderline fascist, isn't it? I mean, it's kind of like modernism and modern supermarkets are evil, anti-Japanese,
Yeah.
they destroy our interior traditions
Yeah.
of domestic being and dwelling. So I
Tanzaki
suppose I think that just trying to make a connection with the platform thing as being sort of trumping the nation state and animation within kind of platforming. Is there some sense of a kind of critical regionalism that can hold out? You were talking about whichever studio was kind of turning to archaic forms of production.
Yeah.
I don't know, is there some...
Well, that's interesting. Miyazaki is a left nationalist, in his own, in the country, and the traditionalism feeding that, in his production, Yeah, I think that's a good.
But I mean, have we had a very kind of Hollywood centric view of anime? I don't know, or maybe not, because the Anne Lee character is a eternally manga character.
Well, as a manga kind of prompt, isn't it? Sort of kind of premise for a project, but then some very different Western logic.
It seems that when you talk about animation, you can't get very far from talking about technical development. In that sense, infrastructure and sort of militaristic tropes kind of quickly enter into the conversation.
I think that the point Edgar made about the switching in terms of what Ailish put up is a really interesting one from the point of view of technologies. Animation as a face of technology, turned toward us, given a kind of anthropomorphic form and so on. I mean, so often when you watch a large-scale, Pixar production and so on, what the film is in terms of content seems highly superficial, compared to the technological kind of operation behind it. Like, I think Pixar's Render Farm is one of the major consumers of water in California.
It's funny, I mean, we started, some of the things we were talking about when we started the film screening yesterday, talking about Moe's influence, artisanal or artistic labour in those early animations of a single person, drawing away. We think of Louisa McKay and sinking into the Lusitania, drawing every one of those really found cells or whatever it is. And I suppose what interests me now with artists turn to animation, a lot of that at work. I mean, you get some artists who are just doing the kind of fairly boiling, fairly kind of low-tech, handcrafted animations, but there's also a lot of wanting to either buy off or deconstruct or harness in some way that huge power of animation. So Arnold sort of taking it apart, or John Wolfson, trying to get the best possible kind of computer animation that he can muster. So that's sort of, it's a curious relationship. I don't suppose there would be many major artists, animators who would want to go back to working in a Winsor McKay or a Méliès way, or if they did, it would be as a kind of stunt. That would be part of the stunt, so it's low-tech nature.
But also, I would think that, younger artists, they don't think about if I make an animation, if they do an animation or another film, they just make the
They
work.
just do work.
It's not, they use what they are curious about.
They're
materials are, what the world is in a way. And this is also something that then we are already in a completely different setting on a platform. Not different, but a kind of.
Right, but are you prepared to configure art as a platform? Are you prepared to say that?
No.
Why not? Because you have to do that according to the principle of the platform, you have to say that there are standardized components within which you have a liberty of events, right? So what is the autocracy means of art? If it's going to be a platform within which the artist is able to produce whatever they want.
Yeah, you could say art is a platform and start from that and open up certain things.
I think
one
that, I
thing
think
that perhaps would differentiate is the minimum of doing content.
Are you sure?
Or
Are you
I
sure?
never much criticised. A Mark Lecky film, the entirely recycled.
So can I comment from the sidelines?
I think that's a very interesting conversation. And I think that I think that, sorry.
Baraki said something that relates relates to what you just mentioned about production of the animation turning our face as sort of a non-human expression. He said something I found extremely curious and recently in 2014, that animation has become a ruling class of images because it's a world of production and not a reproduction. And thinking about that in terms of his earlier kind of operational images and and the machine vision that he explores, I think that's interesting also. Kind of this that I struggle to call non-human because I wouldn't like to.
But does that relate also to a much earlier comment, no new films until the old ones have been used up? There's still more to
Exhausted.
squeeze from them,
Yeah.
still have to
Yeah.
recycle, repurpose, and there's a refuge.
Yeah. Well, then the point I made in conversation earlier on with somebody was to do with the original exhibition of Snow White in the early 1930s and early 40s Disney films, when they realised they could show them and show them and show them again. The point at which, after 7 years of the exhibition of one print of Snow White, it was being shown until it literally fell apart. The print literally was destroying itself in the projector.
I've just got currently, as we speak, there's a week-long thing in Paris about the relationship between mainly Disney actually and MoMA. So art and the avant-garde and art and animation. And they're particularly interested in this idea of when MoMA started collecting animation and how difficult it was. Precisely one reason distributors didn't want to give a print, or studios didn't want to give a print to the Museum of Modern Art, because anyone might go and watch it, and either they didn't value it, it had its run and then it was gone, why archive it, or they just wanted to use those prints until they fell apart.
There was still
They weren't
money
going to
to
give
be
away a print. So that, how that, which is kind of an infrastructural question, but immediately intersects with questions of value and commercial value, artistic value, who's valuing this, which films, it's quite an interesting essay from the 90s by somebody on Iris Bowley.
And how animation enters the archive, like so many pop culture forms like the comic and so on what terms and so on. To come back to the point about Lecky and so on, I think to sort of narrow it in a way, talking about the younger generation who just work with animation in any kind of way, I think there is something to be said about a generation of neo-conceptual practitioners using animation, because it isn't just anybody using animation. It's like, it's clear that in a post-Koons kind of way that the animation object is of interest to a certain generation of conceptual artists. And they're interested in the way that you highlighted about making certain conceptual moves with the animation object. A sculptural turn or a kind of like deconstruction or whatever. Precisely in terms of Lecky's notion of image power, that the the animation object is potent and vibrant, you know, and we can, there are precisely because it's been kind of underutilized, it's easy to expose qualities in it in such a way that feel like a kind of new look, a fresh look at the thing. You know, so I think that was really, really clear when Koons did his Popeyes and sort of physicalized these sort of sculptural Popeyes, that it was like, wow, actually when I, like he's revealing something about that, and it felt like, it felt like a productive move to make. But that's very different to a younger generation who see animation as just kind of a practice to inhabit, a medium to inhabit.
I wonder if, I mean, coming back to animation as this sort of ruling class of images, if it isn't also the other thing, it's a kind of overlord or a master in discourse, or you know, something again that establishes us and our validity, and they're participating in something bigger for its power.
I mean, that's a bigger kind of, it goes back to kind of Alfred to Gell and to some of these bigger ideas, like the sort of, if you think about the animation on a cave wall, for instance, in primitive art, the human desire to imagine a kind of hyper object, you know, these kind of super objects of the world, you know. Animation gives us this ability to create these hyper, exaggerated super objects.
The fetish.
The fetish, and they lord over us in this particular way. But fetish presupposes often a kind of singularity, like, you know, an obsession over a thing. With animation, you have that ability to create a fetish environment, like a world of things, all of which are subject to exaggeration and over-determination, you know, that demand of us a kind of hyper-perception. And that's kind of interesting to me.
There's another thing about animation which we haven't discussed about, I mean, let's say, is in animation, computer animation or whatever, drawing, there's the possibility of creating something from scratch, really absolute scratch. So I mean, I think of this because I had a friend who was a really well-known CG animator before he got a horrible degenerative disease and is now paralyzed for the last 10 years. But anyway, he was really getting off on this, the fact that from nothing, from just a blank computer screen, he could create this whole thing, which you could never do with film or anything like that, and the impact it had. So there's sort of a power dimension there. Maybe that's part of what you're talking about.
That's why the one they use in schools is called Scratch, isn't it? It's what all the little children use.
That's
to
programming
learn
language, yeah.
It's called Scratch.
Called Scratch. That's a
Animation.
platform and a half.
I think that's why animators hate motion capture, because animation gets rid of the indexicality of the moving image, you know, the sort of silver reacting to the light. But then when you track movement data, you introduce a new indexicality into the image, in the same way that rotoscope was a kind of index, you know. And so, like, I think animators fetishize this quality of a tabula rasa and the ability to build out of nothing. And when something comes in to challenge that, you get this kind of dislike for those languages coming in.
But I guess that was even a historical moment, wasn't it? When it was possible to build something out of nothing.
Yeah.
Today it's not practical.
Yeah.
You know, you have all the procedural engines and all that stuff, right?
Yeah. It's not really a nothing, is it? In fact, it's absolutely a huge something.
I had an artist friend of mine who asked me to help him do a film where he would walk in the street and his head would explode. And I thought I had my friend the animator, so I shot it. And the animator friend did the head explode. But he didn't, he was too bored to really do it, you know, he wasn't getting paid much. So it was really terrible, and so I just cancelled the project. But it was exactly that. It was the moment where to make that head explode correctly would have been very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is the case.
Could have just shot him.
A classic example, actually, in terms of Robocop is...
No, it's like filming the rain. Once you made a film, you can't film the rain. You have to light
It
the
just
rain.
doesn't look like rain.
I was just going to say, Phil Tippett, who's the sort of animator lord of that generation of special effects, you know, with Robocop and things like that. He's the classic example of an animator who feels kind of thwarted by history, you know, that the computer came along and that all his skills and his kind of Faustian ability to conjure something out of nothing was kind of underappreciated, and that these kids came along with computers and kind of like, you know, cast him out.
Press a few buttons and
Yeah, very, you know, and but his animators are interesting. Often they work commercially and they realise they're on the wrong side of history and they're no longer relevant, and then they turn into a strange kind of outsider artist where they have their own projects, which are these kind of Henry Darger kind of, you know, infinitely long projects that go on forever. You know, like, I'm going to make a film, and it starts off at 3 minutes, then it's 12 minutes, then it's 3 hours, you know, and it's like, they have a compulsion to create that isn't contained in any kind of a way. And there's a whole generation of animators who are now these peculiar kind of outsider artists, like Richard Williams or Bruce Bickford.
When you say outsider artist, do you mean actually in the way that term used to be used for someone who was outside of the art world?
Yeah, they've never been in the art world, and yet they're making what they deem to be art on their own terms.
So we need to stick to those.
They're not in the art, they're not in
To
the art
stick to
world.
those professions. I find it a bit kind of exhausting, I have to say, talking about always about animators and other people.
Yeah.
It's making images, or I mean, this is a discussion which is really my concern. I think this is.
There is a question, I mean, like really tactically rather than strategically, as to how discrete a notion of animation to work from. You know, are we talking about a discrete set of cultural artifacts? Are we talking about tendencies? You know, this Marvin Gaye Chaplin, the next generation's animation going back to the vaudeville that we saw as inspiration. You know what I mean? There's different ways of playing this. And I do think that's a tactical decision rather than a strategic or indeed intellectual one.
Exactly.
Do we need a set of instances that we work from? You know, so is it useful to really think about animators or people with industrially defined that?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it. Hey.
It's more, I mean, I sort of take the point that the animators, and Phil Tippett does have this kind of Kazankin's work that he's working on in terms of stop motion, but I think where I've read him talking about it, he's talking about that he's making a film that he's been unable to kind of finance in a studio system. And so it's only kind of outside of that as a revenue stream. And I was wondering, I've been trying to think as the conversation has gone on, when there was a discussion about this, you know, animation being a sort of a modality or method that is being taken up by a generation of artists kind of currently, why a non-abstract form of animation was never taken up, say in the 50s or 60s, when it was kind of technically possible, where it was taken up by structural filmmakers using kind of animation very widely. But I can't think of anything that was sort of non-abstract, or, you know, not in the sort of idiom of, even though some of this work was being financed for the exhibition in cinema environments, someone like Mary Ellen Boot making films for the sort of, for, I can't remember which distributor, but they would be shown before features in the same way that a cartoon would be, but they were entirely structural filmmaking. And I was trying to think of which artists, I was sort of racking my brains of which artists may have worked in a sort of non-abstract kind of formal way with animation. I kind of thought there was a moment when Paul McCarthy and Tony Ursula were making animations, with William Wegman as well. There was a sort of period of about 2-3 years when they were kind of making these kind of crude stop-motion bodies of work. But other than Svagmeyer or someone who, I guess, is kind of in that idiom, but is really making kind of stop-motion films, why wasn't it a method or a tool that was being used by people working outside of a film environment or a commercial film environment, if it incorporating kind of cartoons in that? Is that because there was a flexibility and an ease of working within that system? You know, you read Chuck Jones and he'll talk about how he has he started drawing his own comics and aspiring to working in that medium, and then he was given the keys to the palace. But it seemed strange to me that no artists had kind of taken that up. I mean, I realised like digital compositing and animation is much easier now because you can do it on stuff that I can buy and put on my laptop. But stop motion hasn't got any easier or any harder. The kind of structural films were, there's just an interest between kind of abstraction and kind of representation, which seems to have been prohibitive.
Are you talking historically or more recently? I mean, I'm thinking William Kentridge is somebody who came up about. There's who's the South African Robin Rhodes who does the wall drawing, which operates animations. I'm not sure what their status is in view of this overall conversation. You know why in the different practices, but
I mean, you have a
question. Concerning what came up earlier, are we talking about profession and why the term animation is used? The Russian term, for instance, would be multiplication. The word animation is not used for to describe the kind of phenomenon, or to describe the kind of profession, or the professional, or even the technological procedure. So I was thinking at which point we start to feel uncomfortable when we are grasping animation as this phenomenon guided by a certain form of making. Therefore, we use the word. But we're not so much talking about what is animated, or what actually is the animated. Is it an object? Is it movement? Is it image? What is excluded from being animated and why? Subjectivity, for instance, we are immediately kind of shrieking where we are thinking about being animated, either by touch screens or the technology comes to close. What about other technologies like body or the soul? Is it the soul in the apparatus that is counting animation? And then the focus is on the makers of animation from scratch. So is it nothing that is animated? So does it make sense to think animation also from these? They look like they are irrelevant for animation, like animation can animate anything, but obviously this is not the case. So the borders or what is outside or what it deals with sometimes, how it memorizes its own technological procedures. For instance, one could propose, well, okay, there was a pre-animation animation in another technological status, maybe tool-driven or mechanical. Puppet play. Why would we consider that to be animation or not? Or if so, would we just say, well, it's different because it has animated something different?
I think Ghost's theme touched on some of that. Yeah. I mean, I agree that there's a sort of necessity to, I don't know, maybe take out the animation out of the animation.
It's just animation is, for the most part, is a industrial film production practice in which people train and identify as animators in the production of animation for very particular outputs. And because, in a way, what we've been doing today has been very much about establishing a kind of base terminology, we've tended to err on that side of things and not necessarily make that excursion that Verena identifies into.
For me, for example, that was never the intention, actually.
Yeah.
So I would read it in a very different way now. So
Yeah.
for me, it's not, first of all, an industrial set. So already there we have this completely different angle.
Yeah, no, I personally don't relate to it in that way either. But
no, I'm just saying
it's that hegemony, isn't it,
yeah.
of what's in play. But Kentridge is an interesting example because he would never identify as an animator. When he's pressed on the issue of animation, he says he engages in a kind of what he calls a beggar's animation, a sort of poor, like it falls short of animation. It's kind of, it's moving image, but it's kind of, he understands that the rich animation, full animation, is so ideologically connected to its commercial application and so on that he positions himself very strategically engaged in a kind of poor production in the way that Warhol did actually when he talked about his filmmaking, kind of like, oh, I don't know anything about film, that kind of disavowal of knowledge of production, technical knowledge.
He also talks about political, South Africa apartheid, and this is again like then we have this other kind of thing where the discussion actually starts. I would start from that and not from, say, talking about, of course, one knows that he uses one drawings and of course that comes into the discussion, but first of all, he engages with politics.
Yeah.
But is it, when you said about, so in Russian,
Multiplication.
so the term you use for what we call animation is multiplication? Yes, the place to start here would be with the word animation, the cultural specificity.
Perhaps this would be a formless discussion, but of course, well, it makes sense to me to start with a vague phenomenology of the genre, its technological conditions, to go too far back, in 100 years or so, we conceptually, okay, we start with film, or with film animation, and not with pre-filmic mechanical forms of animation. The myth of the golem is the golem animation. Is it imagination that animates the golem, or myth that animates the golem? Has the myth moved from the faculties or the human faculty towards the apparatus, and what this would tell us in terms of the discussion of, what is the animated? But also, when we then talk about animators, when I think, okay, Beuys would not consider himself to be an animator because he moves a dead hair around. So that obviously is an animation. And of course, the history of the genre and the phenomenology of the genre, then it becomes from a tactical decision into a strategic one, because it closes off too many occurrences of the animated, or animation in other contexts.
We've said, whole areas like kinetic sculpture, for instance, how we think, practitioners like Len Lai, for instance, working across animated film, drawing, kinetic sculptures, are really trying to open it up and allow for these connections to take place, where the idea of animation, which is so fertile, can kind of nourish other practices, other arts, and so on.
So part of this conversation is also really pragmatic. It's the kind of conversation you have with your curator friend who has a good idea and you try and work hard. And you end up, there's a series of protocols to play through. The first recommendation is, okay, you want to do a show on animation. What's the opposite of animation? What would anti-animation be? We talk about the generative potential of animation as a creation ex nihilo. I'm intrigued to think about disappearance. The void in animation, all the black splatters that we had again and again and again, the disavowal of the image in animation also. So maybe this is also the point to qualify it's animation and X, or animation against Y, or some way of qualifying this, rather than sticking to. Otherwise, we're caught in this twofold movement, aren't we? We want to expand the notion of animation whilst also trying to understand what our set of objects might be. For instance, I was very interested in this dissimulation within the disappearance of, the disappearance of the image, the disavowal of, the void, the empty screen, the blackness that splatters out and so forth. For me, that might be another way of activating this now. I've got all these conversations, but what is the trigger, what's the thread that allows you to revisit some of these conversations? What is the opposite of animation if the inanimate is no longer, it's no longer safe from being animated. You know, for example, a generalized condition which if you can, it should be or will be animated somehow. The stubborn, you know, is the stubborn the opposite of the animated?
But I suppose I'm thinking it's the monument than the disappearance. But still something like that. So sort of monumental, monolithic, you know, artwork as being lost their nature.
When I heard the presentation about Robocop, what Sonia but immediately came to my mind is the model of totalitarianism, which basically is a sculpture of Robocop.
Yeah.
So is it animation turning into its opposite at this point when it's made still again, revealing what is the animated?
Well, yeah, because with the monolith, I mean, I'm thinking of the Sphinx or something like that. But the Sphinx is an animator, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, historically, like Mumford's myth of the machine or something, the Sphinx animates those who make it, produce it as a god.
Looks like he is rock then, it's a nice kind of hybrid, you know, sacred object and
Yeah. I think
Animated and animators or animation and animation.
in terms of the other of animation, this is more of a practitioner response to that question than a theoretical one. But for me, like the idea of figure ground is important to animation in the sense that when you animate something, there's always a kind of an initial departure. If you think about the way Paul Klee talked about movement in painting, where it's like there's a kind of fixed point and then an excursion from a fixed point. Like for me, ground is almost like earth, like soil, and something grows out of it. Whenever you're doing animation, you sort of plant these things, which are points, and then you get this kind of like movement from a point outward, and it's always growth. It's not. I don't think of animation personally, which is actually now I'm thinking about it, it's totally weird. I don't think about it kind of dialectically as having another. I think about it as a kind of a birth of a thing that either lives or dies. It has a future or it has no future. It's like a kind of like a sparking out of something.
Once you start considering the kind of procedural engines, this No Man's Sky, it changes a bit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's totally primitive conceptualization, but it's like that idea of animation having an other. It's like it's something I have to really think about.
I mean, another to the kind of birth motif would be the idea of the scroll in the background of Roadrunner, Mike talked about. You know, the figures there, it's a background that is kind of running past as a suggestion of mobility. You know, so that inversion of the static and the mobile and what moves and what doesn't. And I guess that's, I mean, there's lots of, again, in terms of figure ground, but also in terms of recent conversation around planetarity and so forth. You know, that whole the Anthropocene and the static and dynamic and how that.
But then I wonder if the as a kind of foil, sort of methodological foil, might be something like the Jonathan Crary account in that book, what's it called, Suspensions of Perception, which is kind of what you're talking about, where he's talking about the zoetrope and things like this. So it's the whole kind of zoetrope as a kind of Ur cinema.
Yeah.
And then the kind of construct in the writing is around, what is it, you have to sort of stand in a certain position to get the animation effect on zoetrope. So his construct is around, you know, the animation or this kind of Ur cinema is a sort of a spatial fixing of a consumer, beholder, viewer, who can be measured and located and fed spectacle. And it's all about this kind of spatial fixing of the viewer. That is a kind of, obviously we're in a totally different, you know, the scenario kicked around is very much unlike that in lots of ways.
No, but then also, I think
But I wonder if that might be a kind of a methodological other to what we've been talking about.
But there's another other to that, what you're describing, which is the, for example, in facial recognition schemes, there is a sort of spatial fixing of the subject. in order to be animated as a animation, right? You need to sort of, if in the zoetrope, you need to sort of position yourself in a certain way so you can actually see the animation. On the other hand, you need to be positioned. You know, architectural infrastructural flows through spaces are being configured so that the individual can be recognized and correctly animated into the sort of system. Yeah, so it's also. I know
There's
that's
also this beautiful film, the Lars von Trier, the Life Obstruction. No, not the Fountain.
Dogville.
Dogville, yeah, exactly, the Dogville. The film set is.
It's imaginary walls.
It's just a plan.
Yeah,
A
it's
transparent
beautiful.
plan, actually, and props.
Mm.
And it works. And that also is something that I think as a scene could the whole film could run through today and would work somehow in each of the.
But I like the constraints built into the model that John is describing, and I think with the mirror. You know, I like that because animation is also all about constraints. Right?
Very much so.
Yeah.
And also, obviously, the other platform is inherently constructed on constraint and information. So those are really important.
Well,
Maybe
talking
there's
about
a distinction between bringing something into being and showing it. You know, I'm thinking of Méliès and Lumière. I mean, in the beginning of cinema, do you bring the image into being, or do you show what is? And in terms of bringing something into being, you never know what it's going to be, in a sense. It's always open to being otherwise, which introduces a kind of contingency into animation, which is different from the contingency of the representational image. And I wonder if that has something to do with something that struck me through the day, which is there's always a tendency in animation towards sensation. I mean, it's also to do with linking it with the use of sound, almost towards kind of pure sensation, as if the animated image could be anything at any moment. What it is, above all else, is sensation, and it lives and justifies itself through sensation. But then that then feeds into the other kind of image. So now everything is animation. So all cinema is kind of sensation.
That's its ideological dilemma, in that it can conjure up sensation in such a way, but then that gets, you know, ultimately it feeds into, as you say, other kinds of image, other, you know, traditional modes of representation and so on. And then we see animation becomes this kind of problematic category because it's seen as feeding the most insidious dimensions of the spectacle and so on.
But there's also kind of the idea that, you know, almost sort of Deleuzian and very Crary too, with his use of Goethe and so on, and colour, that everything is sensation. That this is the truth. That animation reveals the truth of, you know, the emptiness of form, in a sense. That everything is pure differential sensation.
Vibrational, yeah. There's a really nice idea in Christopher Alexander's work on architecture, which equals quality without a name. And it's that experience of walking through good architecture into certain spaces where you feel the space working on you. And he describes it as a sort of vibration. And I think sometimes when I'm thinking about animation, I'm thinking about why I'm interested in this category of movement and when it works and when it doesn't work. It's the closest, I think, that I can get to describing it, is that the film sets up a kind of architecture and that you're taken through that architecture in the montage, and then a movement is delivered to you. And it hits you, something about the architectonics of the film deliver the sensation of the movement to you in an incredibly direct way. And that the great animators are essentially masters of that. you know, someone like Lillian F. Schwartz in her computer animation, I was looking at it at the Whitechapel, watching them all, and I was thinking, she's a real master. Mary Ellen Butte, in her sort of oscilloscope animation, she can, something about in the structure of what she's done, can deliver this vibrant, sensational quality to you, and that I find very interesting in terms of the delivery of movement to you.
It seems to be the underlying identity of what seems opposite within animation. You get Disney and McLaren or something. What are they both doing?
Yeah.
They're both delivering sensation.
Yeah.
That's why one of the things I'm trying to think about is the way which Goethe moves at the end of his life away from colour to turbidity and Trüber, to the troubled. And it's something maybe less sensational, perhaps as his eyes are clouding over with cataracts, who knows, you know, but it becomes a different quality, and I'm sort of wondering if that's also, if in some ways there's animated possibilities around that turbio, trouble, the turbid, that aren't just about the sensational. There's another kind of face to it that is more about haze or I don't know, the image coming about differently, like it being screened onto the cloud or it being seen through a cloud or something more mediated.
Well, maybe in sensation there's a possibility of an offer of an sort of extreme of pleasure, it's a sort of jouissance, but at the cost of a total fragmentation, destruction. So the turbidity or the introduction of a filter is like the attempt to try and maintain a subjectivity within that.
As it's all falling apart, it's a gathering. Well, that's back to that the sort of meshwork or knotting, desperately trying to knot it together before it all dissipates.
Or to knot yourself together before you all dissipate.
Can I come and walk to it?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, we sit here all night. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks everyone.
So we'll hold on to the recordings for the time being. We'll announce details of the next set of events. And
We'll bring this at Milton later.
well, we need to specify that I'd like to have it before, sometime near before President Mitchell, so it will be hopefully over the next few weeks or so. You know, since that's what we need to find a slot that works for us or the program and so forth.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for contributions.